At the dawn of June 13th, Israel launched a massive air assault on Iran, involving 200 aircraft. The attack targeted nuclear and military facilities and resulted in the assassination of key leaders and nuclear scientists. In response, Iran fired 500 missiles and hundreds of drones at Tel Aviv, marking the most intense bombardment since 1944. The confrontations are ongoing, with analysts considering it a full-scale war. The conflict between Iran and Israel dates back to the 1979 revolution. Iran views Israel as an existential threat and enemy and has sought to acquire nuclear weapons for its own security. Israel, which possesses approximately 90 nuclear warheads, considers a nuclear-armed Iran a mortal danger. In 2015, a nuclear agreement was reached between Iran and the United States, but President Trump withdrew from it in 2018, prompting Iran to increase its uranium enrichment to 90%. With tensions escalating, Israel took advantage of the weakened axis of resistance to launch its attack, aiming to destroy Iran's nuclear program and set the nation back. The attack was initiated from within Iran by 1,500 agents who disabled air defenses and identified targets, while Israeli aircraft destroyed nuclear and military sites and assassinated important figures. This constituted a major security breach for Iran. Iran's retaliation was unexpected. Over 500 hypersonic and ballistic missiles, along with drones, struck Tel Aviv and various military and security installations, causing widespread destruction and forcing millions of settlers into shelters. At dawn on June 22, 2025, the United States escalated the situation by launching a large-scale air and missile attack on Iran's nuclear facilities in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The assault utilized stealth bombers, 30 Tomahawk missiles, and GBU-57 bunker-buster bombs. President Trump announced that the operation was a complete success and that all 3 targets were destroyed. Iran deemed the strike a blatant act of aggression, and the Revolutionary Guard declared that the country had entered into an open war. Missiles were subsequently launched towards Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, with reports of explosions and a full-scale Israeli alert. Iran's allies began to mobilize. The Houthis threatened an imminent response, and warnings were issued that the conflict could expand to the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, jeopardizing global trade and energy supplies. The Iranian president insisted that the nuclear program would continue under any threat, while Supreme Leader Khamenei vowed that the American escalation will not go unanswered. Within the United States, opinions were divided between supporters of the attack and opponents who warned of the consequences for American forces in the Middle East. The international situation grew more tense, with the United Nations warning that the possibility of sliding into a regional or international war was now real and imminent. All indicators suggest that the region has entered a phase of open confrontation with no political mediation, amid American-Israeli insistence on escalation and Iranian commitment to the fight. Following the anxiety that arose between Iran and Israel, the entire world is on high alert. With every development in the course of the war between them, discussions begin about the potential damage if Iran or any other party were to launch a nuclear weapon. Strangely, if you follow the discussions among experts, you will find that their biggest concern is the aftermath of nuclear explosions, not the explosions themselves. Perhaps the most terrifying thing for scientists is the horror of a nuclear winter. So what is this nuclear winter?
So what is this nuclear winter?
There is no disagreement about the power and horror of nuclear weapons. As soon as someone decides to use them, a bomb will cause a massive explosion that destroys buildings and infrastructure, and of course, kills humans, animals, and plants. But despite the horror of the blast, its effect is not as dangerous as the radiation it leaves behind. For example, the famous Hiroshima bomb caused the deaths of about 80,000 people in the first moments. But 5 years after the explosion, the death toll reached 340,000. The deadly radiation left by the bomb is the second stage of the evil of a nuclear weapon. And this stage is much more powerful than the first one, as is clear from the death toll. But what many may not realize, because it has never happened before, is the third stage of the evil of weapons of mass destruction, which is the nuclear winter stage. First, a nuclear winter does not require a nuclear weapon to be dropped on a specific city to kill tens of thousands of its inhabitants. It is very possible for a nuclear strike to occur in Europe and lead to the death of people on other continents. The nuclear winter phase could lead to the extinction of life on Earth. You might think we have answered the question of the episode.
The death toll? No one knows. Billions? Maybe more.
But if you noticed, the language used was hypothetical. There is disagreement among experts on this specific topic, but for now, all we can say is that in all cases, the number of victims will be record-breaking, potentially reaching into the billions.
Billions? Maybe more.
However, the issue of the near-complete extinction of humanity and all living creatures requires explaining some details.
Let's first understand what a nuclear winter is and what it can do. In short, a nuclear winter is the environmental devastation resulting from nuclear explosions. Note the use of the word explosions in the plural. A nuclear winter is not a condition that can arise from the detonation of 1, 2, or even 3 bombs. This stage requires a full-scale nuclear war between nations using dozens of bombs from their nuclear arsenals. In this scenario, with the intensive use of nuclear weapons, the explosions would saturate the atmosphere with dust, smoke, and combustion byproducts. The entire atmosphere would be filled with a giant cloud of soot, which in turn would block or at least severely weaken sunlight. This is where the name nuclear winter comes from, because in this case, the sun will not shine through. No doubt, you're now wondering about the number of explosions required to reach such a catastrophic situation. The truth is, this question has been on scientists' minds since the bombing of Hiroshima in the early years after World War II. Before the development of powerful computers that could perform computational simulations, opinions differed on the number of explosions needed to cause a nuclear winter and its destructive impact. Scientists made assumptions based on the data they had, relying on massive volcanic eruptions that changed the climate in their regions. For example, the volcanic eruption in the United States in 1815 was so huge that it caused a large amount of combustion byproducts, leading to snowstorms in July. In Indonesia in 1883, the eruption of Krakatoa was recorded to have lowered global temperatures by a full degree Celsius. At that time, there were many hypotheses trying to imagine the effects of a nuclear winter, but as computers advanced and we could rely on them for simulations, the picture became much clearer. Scientists began to feed the computers with all the available information, and the computer started to make accurate predictions of the likely scenario. For instance, 2 NASA scientists, Alan Robock and Brian Toon, conducted a computer simulation to discuss the climatic effects of a small-scale nuclear war between India and Pakistan. At that time, tensions over the Kashmir region were high between the two countries, and each was threatening the other with nuclear weapons. The scientists envisioned a scenario of a nuclear war between them in which 100 nuclear bombs were detonated, and the results of the study were terrifying. The scenario developed by the computer was as follows. First, massive amounts of black carbon and nitrogen oxides would ascend to the stratosphere, where they would begin to absorb sunlight and heat the entire layer. Once a significant amount of solar energy is absorbed, the climate on the Earth's surface will begin to change. Whether it is summer or winter, every spot on Earth will turn into a cold, cloudy winter, and all the soil will become frozen, preventing plants from growing. But perhaps the biggest problem is radiation leakage. When the stratosphere heats up and heavy gases accumulate in it, the ozone layer will begin to erode, allowing ultraviolet rays to pass through. These rays would have a devastating effect on all living organisms. Even if the soil were arable, crops would be damaged by the radiation. This is of course in addition to the burns and cancers that would affect most living creatures. Even aquatic life would be affected by these rays, and most fish would die. This frightening scenario will continue to escalate for a period of 1 to 4 years. After these 4 years, the effects will begin to gradually subside, but they will remain harmful for a full 10 to 25 years. When you look at this terrifying scenario and compare it to our question, can humans survive a nuclear winter or not, you'll find that humans first need to survive the nuclear explosions that would occur. After that, they would be required to endure the effects of radiation and the nuclear winter, all with food scarcity and widespread famine due to crop failure and animal deaths. But despite this terrifying scenario, from the perspective of this simulation, humans would not go extinct.
It's good to see everyone smiling.
Even in these times, we find our joy.
The reasons for survival would vary, with many factors taken into account, the most important being shelters and the human ability to store supplies. A group of people would be able to hide and would have a stockpile allowing them to live through these years, and they would later return to repopulate the Earth naturally. But wait, the simulation we talked about was based on predicting the results of the explosion of 100 nuclear bombs. Currently, the declared number of nuclear bombs reaches 12,705 warheads, and this is only the declared number. Perhaps the answer to the question is now much clearer. A nuclear winter, despite its great danger and the frightening number of casualties it would cause, is ultimately a natural disaster like giant volcanoes and earthquakes. Just as there are weak and strong earthquakes and volcanoes, the same applies to a nuclear winter. To know whether humans can survive a nuclear winter or not, we must first know what kind of nuclear winter we are talking about: weak, medium, or strong. Some scientists say that a nuclear winter that could actually lead to extinction is one that would result from explosions capable of sending 150 million tons of combustion byproducts into the atmosphere. To clarify this number further, it is the winter that would result from a large-scale nuclear war in which at least 4,000 nuclear warheads are detonated. However, others argue that these theoretical results cannot be relied on because they do not measure awareness. These theoretical results do not account for how many of the survivors of the explosions and radiation would have the necessary awareness to act correctly in the new reality. Because in the event of a nuclear winter, everything will change. Minor injuries and simple illnesses like infections and diarrhea would become fatal symptoms during a nuclear winter if not prepared for with emergency medications. In addition, there must be a fundamental nuclear awareness, such as people knowing which wild plants can grow without light. Scientists say there are 33 types of plants that can be used and cultivated in the event of a nuclear winter. This is in addition to hundreds of recommendations for dealing with everything in a nuclear winter, for which there are dedicated books to teach people how to act if a nuclear winter actually occurs. That's all for now. Who made it this far? All of you who made it, give us a like before you go so we know how many reached the end. And don't forget, if you have a suggestion for an episode, write it for us in the comments. Peace.